Welcome to, I think, is this the sixth session that I've done. It's nice to be here with all of you. I've got a small microphone issue again, where basically I'll show you guys what I mean, but the clip on here is only I can't basically change the direction of it, so I can only clip it onto clothes that have like a strap or like a side thing, which obviously this time of year in winter isn't ideal. And let me just say hi to everyone. Hi, Eve. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Tanya. It's nice to see you guys all here. I've got a few different bits I'm going to talk about today, but one of them that I know has come up in kind of previous sessions, and so I thought it'd be good to do a bit more of a deep dive, is how we sort of cope or relate when there's conflicts or friendships or situations that haven't quite gone to plan, or where there's things that don't feel or sit right with us, and how we reflect on those things, how we kind of navigate, what doesn't feel right versus what objectively isn't right for us. And just kind of reflecting on situations, trying to look at things from like different perspectives, and ultimately coming from kind of a loving, compassionate, sort of values focused approach, which means that we're honoring ourselves and our needs, but at the same time, also potentially giving people the benefit of the doubt, or trying to understand another person's context or situational reference point as well. And I've got a couple of sort of personal recent examples to share around that, which I can fill you guys in on also. So we'll just wait a little bit longer because before I kind of properly dive in, because I know we're still waiting for people to join. But I thought I would start with a little thing that I've read this week. Well, read, saw. So I've been noticing everywhere, and I don't know if you guys have as well, but this topic of kind of connection, community, etc., is coming up more and more. So I saw a advert, I think it was like an espresso advert on LinkedIn, and one of the like the whole kind of theme of it was an espresso professional. So Nespresso, the coffee brand, and they were saying cultivating community and connection from the yoga studio to the gym, enhance your wellness rituals with Nespresso coffee. And I thought it was so interesting how we're seeing these ideas of community and connection coming up in so many different areas, and even, now in like advertising and for coffee, which obviously coffee is a social thing. And so, they're playing on that and then taking it into like other spaces where you wouldn't typically think, okay, I'll have a coffee like at the yoga studio, um, or at the gym. But anyway, this advert it's quite a nice, heartwarming advert to watch, and it kind of starts with, you know, um, talking about community and connection, and then one of the subtitles on it says it's the very reason we're here. And I took a screenshot of that because I wanted to talk about it. And at the end of the kind of advert, they have the Nespresso logo, like Nespresso UK and Ireland, and it says crafting connections. That's what they've just the tagline they've decided to go with. And it says infuse coffee into your wellness rituals. And I thought it's such an interesting idea to use community and connection to kind of sell a product. But what they're selling is more than just a product. They're selling an experience, a lifestyle, the kind of culture around it, that feeling of connecting with other people. And frankly, if I was in the market for a coffee machine for a yoga studio or for a business, I would probably consider that based on what it suggests. Although there is that idea that, people say at work, um, that people spend too much time sort of like, by the water cooler, so to speak. And that's kind of what it's promoting. But I remember when I had a mix of working from home and working in the office, when I went to the office, I used to mainly use that time to kind of talk to people and connect with people, because the rest of the time, everything I was doing behind a screen or behind a laptop, I was very aware that I could just be doing that at home by myself. So the time that I spent, with people in person, I wanted to reap the benefits of that, and very much, take advantage of that. And I think I do that now as well with the kind of production, the show I'm working on in London, when I go into the office there, I try to use that time more to speak to people than to do sort of laptopy admin stuff on my own. And I'm drinking a fennel. The tea is called Radiance, but it's like I think it's fennel and mint or something like that. So if anyone needs a reminder to take care of yourself, get a hot drink, get a glass of water, please do. I say that every live, just every time I remember to take a sip of my drink. Um, so yeah, so that the Nespresso thing was one of the things that I wanted to share today that I just came across, and I'm seeing it more and more. And if any of you are seeing other bits around community and connection being mentioned or being talked about, in advertising or otherwise, please do share in the chat where you're seeing it or ways you've seen it pop up in that you maybe haven't seen before. So obviously today's main kind of themes and topics is around um when, like, let's say conflict, or I'm going to go a couple of steps lower than conflict and call it, situations that feel icky when they show up in our personal relationships or in our lives, or even with like acquaintances or people that we don't know very much. How do we navigate that? How do we sort of think and feel and act based on that? So, and please, feel free to put in the chat if any of these things resonate for you, or how you personally respond in these kinds of situations, or if you have any examples or anything you want or need support or feedback, or a fresh perspective on. We're kind of all here to help each other, learn from each other. And, I don't have all the answers, but me or someone else in this space might be able to give you a different perspective. So, one of the things that, there's been actually a lot of things in this area that have come up this week for me. So, I'll give you an example. On our kind of building WhatsApp group, we have a lot of different members. I'm one of the admins and one of the people that kind of run and look after these groups. And um, quite often we have to sometimes moderate things because, and when I say moderate, I mean, like in the traditional sense of like an online moderator, making sure that no one's being mean to anyone or there's nothing being said that can upset anyone. So, we just, myself and like one other neighbor, have a role in kind of keeping things sort of on topic and positive and, fair. And so there was a situation a couple of years back over COVID where someone had like a frustrating situation where neighbors were like doing something and leaving like rubbish that was going on their balcony or that kind of thing. And they kind of put a message in the group being like, of describing these people who they didn't know who it was, but I was like, oh, people are such, like, I can't remember what the word was, but it was something that was like not very politically correct in terms of, and maybe a bit like derogatory and not really a kind of cool thing to say in this day and age. And obviously this person just said it like based on frustration, and they didn't mean like anything bad by it, they didn't have bad intentions, but I just sent them a message really gently being like, hey, just to flag that, we try not to use like language like that on the groups, because obviously that can be seen as like offensive to some people. And the person sent me a message back, which I felt was kind of, fair, saying like, hey, I don't really know you like personally, so I find I'm very uncomfortable that you've messaged me and like addressed this with me or like told me this. um and obviously I'm one of the like directors of our development. I'm also one of the admins of, I've created and run all the WhatsApp groups with someone else. And so I basically, yeah, so I basically, I was well meaning in my response, and I thought I was quite tactful and quite gentle and kind of kind in my wording. And obviously I didn't mean to make this person feel uncomfortable or for them to kind of not be, I didn't mean anything bad by it, but I did feel the need to kind of speak up and just say that, hey, actually, like, we don't use those phrases, or like ideally that's not like super cool. And I felt awful afterwards, like I felt really icky. And I don't know if you guys, I'm sure that most of you know what I'm talking about with this, like when I talk about this icky feeling of where you've addressed something with someone and you've done it in a nice way, like you haven't done anything wrong, And but because of like them not liking it, or you know, sometimes even they can have an okay response, but you still feel a bit icky because you feel like you've spoken up or you've done something that's like out of your comfort zone a little bit. And anyway, so this person said this to me, and then I just felt really like awkward and uncomfortable, and it just like wasn't a nice feeling. And I think I must have tried to then, and one thing that I do in these kinds of situations, I can't remember if I did it then or not, is that I kind of over explain myself, or I end up trying to like justify myself, because basically I feel like I didn't have bad intentions and I was well meaning. And when that isn't, when I don't feel like that has necessarily like landed with the other person, or you know, my well meaningness or my good intentions haven't come across, I then feel like I have to justify or explain, and I'm sure some of you also feel that or have that. And I'm trying really hard not to do that as much. So, um, yeah, so then anyway, so this basically an interesting thing that happened, and I will catch up on the comments shortly. But an interesting thing that happened is this neighbor was like selling some items like recently on our marketplace group on our WhatsApp thing, and I went to I messaged, and we were messaging about an item, and then I realized that it was the same person that I'd had this conversation with a couple of years back, and I hadn't met her. And anyway, I went to her apartment like this week, and she was so sweet and so welcoming and so nice to me, and I was really nice to her as well, and we had a really like positive, friendly exchange, and neither of us mentioned anything about the other situation. Um, so yeah, I thought it was interesting. It made me feel there was like this bittersweet feeling where part of me was like, oh, like what was I afraid of? Because actually, you know, clearly it was just a little misunderstanding, but I felt kind of uncomfortable about it for like a long time. Not that I spent ages thinking about it, but you know, I would have maybe previously felt like nervous or whatever, but actually it was like just totally fine, and I didn't have anything to worry about, and it was all good. And I think I came in with a kind of light positive energy, and sort of she had the same, and you know, we're probably going to go for a walk together at some point or something like that. So yeah, it's interesting how, you know, things that happen sometimes, you have a completely different expectation of how that's going to go like later on, or what that might then transmute into. But you know, clearly, despite there being like a weird situation that it began with, it kind of did actually end up kind of being all like fine and even positive. So I'm going to catch up on the comments now. So, and hi to everybody that's joined since I did the first round of hellos. So Peterbrook, you said very much so. Depending on the people or situation, you go silent quite often. In the past, would be very reactive. Yeah, I completely hear that. I think, and that's an interesting one for me as well. It's like knowing when I have the sort of consciousness to pause. Um, I try to think about like, is this worth it, or should I save my breath? But that doesn't always happen or always work. So, Tanya, looking for advice on losing contact with a childhood best friend. She just stopped talking to me and hasn't responded to me. I stopped reaching out to her because I feel there's nothing else to do. I don't understand what happened because there was no conflict between us. So, Tanya, this is a really interesting point, because one of the things that actually prompted me to set up talking about these topics and community and connection and this sort of thing was twofold. First of all, I noticed that you know, m- because of like COVID and just lifestyles and technology, we're less connected than ever before, and we're more isolated or more lonely than ever. And I've been hearing a lot about this, reading a lot about it, and seeing it firsthand. And then the second thing was that I've had an inordinate number of friends or acquaintances or people in my life share stories with me in the last year or so around how they've had like fallouts or lost contact with, or you know, been suddenly ghosted by really close friends, lifelong friends, childhood friends. And this has happened over and over, and it's really strange and interesting because I feel like I've never heard this as much, like ever, in as much as I have in the last year or so. And I don't know if it's more that people are sharing more, or if something's shifted kind of, you know, with us in the world in the last year, but this is happening a lot. So the first thing I'd say is that, you know, you're not alone um in this respect, and you're not the only person who's experienced this or gone through it. There seems to be some kind of phenomenon or shift. Um the The other thing that I would say, so I read this thing, not read, I watched a YouTube video, it was a YouTube short today, and I wrote this down to share with all of you. And it's really interesting timing because I think it feeds into your situation a little bit. So basically there's this YouTuber he's quite funny. He's called Dustin Pointer, and he basically makes these videos where he runs around like a in a garden or like a massive bit of grass with a giant red flag. And what he'll cut clips of him running around with this giant red flag, and it's a massive red flag. He'll cut that intermittently with clips of people doing really red flaggy things. So like, a guy might be being like mean to his girlfriend, or someone might say something like rude or inappropriate to someone else, and then he'll like cut those clips with him running around with a red flag, and it's really funny. One of the things that, anyway, he had this clip where today, which I watched, and he was talking about how when he was a child, or when he was younger, his best friend went to a different school and ended up like sort of ignoring him a bit, and not really like not laughing at their private jokes anymore, and not really spending time with him or making an effort with him. And so he called his grandma, who was like his known source of wisdom, and she said to him, the moment you start wondering how much space you take up in a person's heart, give them space and then see if they then try to fill it. And he was saying, and he said this, and I just loved it. It was so sweet. He said to her, he was like, "Oh, grandma, like, where's this wisdom from?" And his grandma said that it's just like from her heart. Um, so yeah, how sweet. I just thought that was a really nice point, because I think so. I've talked about this before, and this is kind of, I guess, the theme of today is obviously, look, relationships, friendships, connections, etc., take two or more than two people. And while I think the onus can be on us to sometimes show up, or maybe we need to make a little bit more effort than the other person does from time to time, overall, I think the kind of energy balance should correct itself or be somewhat equal. If you're in a situation where, and I think, another thing is how it makes you feel can be one of your best indicators, provided that, you're otherwise sort of balanced and healthy and taking care of yourself, and your cup is full, and you're looking after yourself and not sort of like reliant or codependent or whatever on other people. If you're looking at it from an objective point of view, it's like, does it feel okay to you, does it not sit right with you? Because that can tell you what you need to know. And even if you're giving the person the benefit of the doubt, does it still not sit right with you? So I think if you feel like you're in a situation where you've made loads of effort, you've followed up with this person, tried to stay in contact with them, tried to maintain the relationship or connection, and then they're not responding to you, um, you've kind of done your part, so to speak. And I understand that, and for anyone that joined that needs a reminder to have a sip of water or make yourself a cup of tea, please do hydrate. Um, but yeah, so essentially what I was saying is that you kind of know if you've done everything that you can do, then like you get to a point where you just have to hit pause. And one of the things I was going to talk about today, given a situation that I'm dealing with right now, um, is kind of sitting in that discomfort and being able to just kind of like let go and hit pause without feeling the need to do anything. So, and I will get on to that. Um, so I think I just want to respond to each part of what you've said, and if there's any kind of follow-up points or thoughts you have, please like put them in the chat, and I'll respond to them first before I go through the other comments. So I understand that obviously it feels really tough when you feel like you haven't done anything wrong, and this just suddenly happened, and she stopped talking to you and hasn't responded. And I think that can leave us feeling like, what have we done? Could we have done something differently? And I think there's an element of like both vulnerability and powerlessness there, because the thing is, if you knew what you'd done, or if there was a reason, then you might kind of I think that would be easier to digest in a way, or easier to understand than feeling like there's no explanation. I mean, our brains like knowing what's going on. We like to know where we stand. We like to be able to understand things, and basically like not having a response or not having any understanding or information puts your brain out of coherence. So it's almost worse not knowing what's happening or why, than even if like your friend thought you did something terrible or whatever, or even if you had done something terrible and it was your fault and you felt bad about that, I think it's worse like not knowing, because there's the uncertainty there, and also there's the feeling of like being misunderstood, or maybe like this person thinks I've done something that I haven't done, etc. And yeah, I think you've said yourself that you feel there's nothing else to do and you stopped reaching out. And I think I'd be interested to know how that felt to you, because I think it probably felt a bit sort of bittersweet and a bit of conflict, right? Like on the one hand, you sort of feel a little bit like, well, I I want to try and I want to, do my part, and sort of I care about this person. I don't want to lose them. But at the same time, it's like I've done everything I can, and I'm not gonna just keep talking to myself at this point. Um, and in terms of like, the not understanding what happens, I think that is exactly that. It's a tough one. And one thing that I've always said, and I really strongly feel, is that we have to create closure for ourselves. Nobody else can give that to us. There can be situations where, people can kind of say or share something that could give you a bit of closure, but ultimately the closure comes from us, because equally there are situations, and we've all seen it, where, you know, let's say someone has like a breakup or a friendship dissolves, and one person is very clearly telling the other person, why they've left, what went wrong, like what isn't working for them, etc. And the other person just like refuses to accept or believe it, and will continue to like cling on or chase the other person or try to get them back or whatever. So, closure is very much something that, while other people can help with it, like it's something that it's internal for us, or created by us. So let me catch up on the other comments. So Lauren, yeah, you said it happened last night, and I think that was about the feeling icky thing that I said, because I remembered seeing that comment when I said that. So, Eve, you've shared that you've ghosted people in the past because you found it hard to have difficult conversations and be honest about my feelings. I've avoided having these conversations, but would love to start feeling more able to deal with conflict or difficult conversation going forward. So, Eve, I'll come back to that um with you, and just to kind of respond to Tanya again. It's nice in a way that you've got kind of an alternate perspective on it, is you're hearing from another side where, you know, I guess because we only often see our side of things, right? And that can be tough. And the reality is that you may have done nothing objectively like wrong. Your friend might have other stuff going on, or be kind of on a different path, or even if there might be a mismatch as far as your friend's concerned, and it could be something deeper, or um that's existed for a longer time, but obviously because she's not bothered to say anything to you, you have no idea. And I think that's quite an interesting. Oh wow, I just realized that I hadn't had my screen brightness on. Okay. Is it better brighter or less bright? Because I think it feels a little bit bright now. Let me just see if I can adjust this. I don't know, guys. But yeah, okay. Anyway. Um, right. So where was I? I lost my train of thought because I noticed that the screen brightness was low. And thank you for the hearts, guys. Keep sending them up. Um, so yeah, I think so. I think it's one of the things that I wanted to talk about, was like accepting the discomfort, or sitting with, where you feel like you've done everything that you can in a situation, and where do you go from there. And I think it's one of the things, was like, for me, having acceptance of it, or being able to, I guess, even if you can't necessarily accept it and just be cool with it in that moment, like maybe parking it or putting it to one side so that you can focus on other things, and um not let it like consume you. And it also, it could be to do with, you know things that your friend has going on. So for example, like they might be an avoidant or have avoidant tendencies, which means that, if things are difficult or complicated, or they feel overwhelmed with regards to like the friendship or another situation, they just might not have capacity. um and that could have like probably nothing to do with you, and everything to do with them and how they deal with things, how they respond to things. So I know we've got some wisdom from PJ that I need to read. So PJ said, "Hey Tanya, thanks for sharing." And hi PJ, I hope you're well. Hey Tanya, thanks for sharing first. No, this has nothing. This is this what's this what's this. Oh, okay. So wait, I'm getting the grammar all wrong in my head. So PJ says, "Hey Tanya, thanks for sharing first. Know this: whatever is going on with your childhood a best friend may be nothing to do with you." And that's what I was just saying. It may be completely something to do with your friend, and you happen to be collateral at this time point. Sometimes time has ways to heal, resolve. Don't shy away from giving space, embrace it, and allow your friend to reach back whenever they feel ready. Just let them know you're here to engage and support when they're ready to speak. I think that's absolutely great advice. And I'd also take it further, and I'd say another way of, like, even if you don't feel, even if you feel like you've reached out and kind of already done those things, just even maybe um for yourself, like creating a bit of closure for yourself, and looking at it as that you'd really like to hear back from this person, but if you don't, um kind of being open to that possibility as well, and understanding that maybe sometimes things happen for a reason. And another thing that I think about as well is, like, around like boundaries, is actually, look, if I was in a situation with a very close friend who just suddenly ignored me, despite, I'd understand a couple of messages get missed, like, fine, they have something going on, but um if a friend ignored me repeatedly when I tried to reach out and didn't even have the capacity or like consideration to say to me, like, hey, I'm just going through something, um you know I don't have capacity right now, or let me reach out to you when I'm ready, or just something or the other. I think it also comes down to, like, I guess, consideration and respect. Because you don't know what's going on with that person, but equally you're not psychic, or I don't know, unless there's something that they expect you to know about, or I don't know whether there's a way you can check in with somebody, a mutual friend or like one of their family members, and just say that you're concerned and you haven't heard from them. Are you seeing them like active online, or do you know that they're otherwise like fine and like responding to other people or anything? Okay, let me see other comments. So yeah, Lauren said, "Me too, Eve, Tanya. Maybe your friend's going through something deep that has nothing to do with you, possibly." Yeah, or like equally, that is an option, right? But equally, they just might like not have time or capacity. Like, it doesn't. I think this is one of the things, is usually the simplest explanation is the most likely one. So realistically, they could just be like busy and overstretched and overwhelmed, and maybe not having a like super difficult time, but just short on kind of resources and capacity. Um, and I know that, like, there's, like, we've talked about this before. A lot of us have loads of unread WhatsApp messages that we, it's not like we don't intend to reply to people or whatever, but it's like things get in the way. There's like a million groups. There's so many things to respond to all the time that sometimes, I just have to be like, okay, I've got 40 WhatsApp messages. I'm not looking at any of them. Um, but eventually I do get back to people, and I do say, like, everything's like, you know, um fine. Sorry, I'm just catching up on messages while I'm trying to talk, which I can't do both simultaneously, so I should hit pause. Let's see what we have. So, Amma said, "I think people are becoming more authentic with huge paradigm shifts in the world. Don't want to be in relationships they've outgrown or that no longer align with who they're becoming." Yeah, and do you know what? Like, also sometimes it is easier to just kind of peter out than it is to actually say, like, "Oh, hey, friend, I'm having like a friendship breakup with you." And that might not be what's happening here, by the way, but I just mean that, sometimes people think it's easier to just let things fizzle out. Although if she's completely ignoring you, I think that's not like cool, and that's not really like okay. And I sort of do think if you've got capacity to post pictures and stuff, then like clearly she could have messaged you back at some point, hopefully. But I mean, yeah, I don't know how many times you tried to reach out or in what ways. But because without having context, it's difficult for me to comment. Like, I don't know if you've sent like 50 messages over a period of time and they've all been ignored, or if it's like you've messaged once or twice. Because I've heard variations of this story where like people have said, "Oh, like this person like ghosted me," and it's someone they've known for a really long time, and I ask them for context, and they'll say like, "Oh, I messaged them once and I tried to call them once, and then they didn't hear back, and they kind of assume automatically the person's like ghosted them." And I said, "Well, tell me about this person." And in the story that I'm talking about, it's like this person has a family, they've got a job, like it may be that they've just missed the message and the call, or meant to call you back and just like haven't got around to it. Um, so yeah, and I talked about this on one of my past sessions. I said like really do what feels right for you and what feels authentic for you. Hi Jennifer. So if it feels authentic and right for you to reach out again, then like by all means do that. If it feels authentic for you to get your sister or someone else that you know to just like pass a message on for you, or to kind of try and get some information, like feel free to do that. I mean, there's loads of options, but it kind of feels like at this point you don't have anything to lose because she's not responding to you. So I think it's down to how much you kind of want to like leave it, or you want to try and get answers. But I would say first and foremost, prioritize your well-being, your peace, and like sort of just keeping yourself well, and safe, and sort of putting your energy first. So yeah, because I think it's difficult. Like if you message her, and if you message again or call again, if you can do that without having the expectation or then being disappointed if you then don't hear anything, um, then I guess it's like not a bad thing to do. But I mean, for me personally, like I would be, if I reached out again and still didn't get anything, I would be disappointed. So yeah, so Bree said I've been watching Dustin's videos lately too. I saw that one and it resonated a lot. Yeah, and then another thing I've been watching on YouTube that's been making me laugh so much is there's a woman called Tamara Double Chocolate, and she basically will kind of record herself in front of videos of people doing really, really terrible, awful cooking. So it's just like it's things that you can't even really call cooking. Some of it, it's like someone made s'mores popcorn and they put like marshmallows, melted chocolate, like oil or water, and popcorn kernels, and it was just like a soupy mess. It was just like in one pan, and then she'll like sort of narrate and comment really sort of sarcastically as they go on making it, and she's like, "Yeah, I just put it all in one dish because you don't want to dirty up those dishes," and it's like genuinely hilarious. So for anyone that joined, I basically shared a quote earlier um, from a YouTuber called Dustin Pointer, who makes these really funny videos where he runs around like a garden with a massive red flag, and he'll cut that in between videos of people basically doing things that are red flaggy, so like someone being rude to their girlfriend or whatever. And then he'll basically chop the footage of the red flag situation with him running around with a red flag. And he was saying that he was just on one of his videos on YouTube Short. He was talking about like a situation that happened to him where his childhood best friend or something um basically just kind of stopped hanging out with him, stopped laughing at their private jokes, and just wasn't making effort with him anymore when he was a lot younger. And he'd called his grandma, who was like his kind of go-to for advice, and she said this to him, and I thought it was so poignant. The moment you start wondering how much space you take up in a person's heart, give them space and then see if they fill it. And he basically said that he asked his grandma like where this wisdom was from, and his grandma said it's just like you know like from not from anywhere, like she just came up with it. And he was like, what? So this is just from your heart? But I think it's really true, and I think it's kind of balancing that giving people space with also like making an effort and trying and doing what's authentic to you and showing up with like love and compassion and kindness. So I'm just going to catch up on the comments. So Tanya, you said I checked in with her sister and she said everything's good with her. She's still on social media and posts pictures of her family occasionally. So yeah, I mean, I guess like, it's positive to hear that she's doing okay and that she's like well, but I think yeah, that's tough, isn't it? Because then it's hard for me personally. Like I basically struggle with it not feeling personal in those kinds of cases. So you've messaged her multiple ways and called with no response. She's clearly ignoring you. Yeah, I mean that kind of tells you everything that you need to know. And I think for you, um, I think it's also worth thinking about like, do you want to have a friendship or a relationship with someone who um can just ignore you like that without giving you any kind of explanation or any heads up? Because that you also have a choice in this. But I just wanted to like honor you for still showing up and making an effort and trying to do what you felt is like the right thing, in terms of, your friendship. And um yeah, and I hope that you get some kind of like peace or closure around the situation. And there's like loads of people on here obviously who are sending you love and really kind of empathize and um understand what you're kind of going through. And I think another thing to think about is worth as well, like how, in terms of like the friendship you had with her, like how, and this is kind of, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, um but just like go along with me on this journey. How great a friendship really was it up until the point where she started ignoring you? Do you feel like you've kind of lost a lot, or are there potentially other people in your life who, care about you and show up and respond consistently and who have your back and who probably wouldn't just kind of ghost? That's worth reflecting on. And I know it doesn't like ease the kind of pain or the sense of loss or grief of losing a best friend, but just know that you are still like loved and appreciated. And I'm certain that you have people in your life who do support you in the ways that that friend no longer does. And if you don't, then in a lot of my sessions we talk about building connections and community, and building relationships and sort of deep bonds with people who are kind of aligned to you and can help you to to be sort of more authentically yourself, and also to help you grow. Because one of the things that I always say is that sometimes we spend time with people, or we stay friends with people just because we've known them for a long time, not because they're necessarily adding a lot of value to our lives, or you know um sort of, I don't know how to word this in a fresh or tactful way. But, like they're people who sometimes can be holding us back, but we just have them in our lives because that's what we've done for however long we've known them. So, Tanya, you said, I'm letting go. My dad passed away and she didn't even respond to me when that happened. To me, that's really cold and heartless. I'm so, so sorry to hear that. That's really awful. And I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know in that situation, that ultimately, and it's not about, I think what's helpful is if you take it out of the specific situation and you look at it objectively, and this applies for relationships, friendships, anything, is what do you deem to be acceptable behavior in any context? So in a friendship or a relationship or whatever, I think you would expect, and you can reasonably expect, some support or a response when you have something like that happen. And it sounds like her not doing that kind of already pushed a boundary for you. And another thing around like this whole thing of grieving friendships or losing friendships, there's been a lot of articles and kind of dialogue around this, and I encourage you to kind of look up some of these things, because actually people are talking about it more and more. And for those of you who've joined later, we're just talking about like conflict and relationships. And like there's a massive sort of influx that I'm hearing in my own personal life, and friends of friends and acquaintances saying that they've had friends, or best friends or childhood friends, like just suddenly ghost them out of nowhere. And this is happening more and more, and it's like, I think, I don't know if there's a paradigm shift going on, as someone else mentioned, or what else is at play, but it seems to be really common. And the other part of it is like, I guess obviously all of us are here and we do a lot of work on ourselves and we have a lot of open conversations. But my friend who I went for a walk with today said to me, she's like, and I was talking to her about a situation that I'm personally having at the moment, and she said, "Oh, but you're extraordinary, and that person's just ordinary." And she was, she meant it in a light-hearted way, but ultimately what she was saying is, I'm very kind of open and communicative and able to like voice my concerns or address things openly, whereas other people, and including the person that I'm speaking about, might be more sort of like avoidant or less able to articulate or address things head on. And yeah, so that's kind of something to bear in mind, that we sometimes are like disappointed, or we feel let down because, and quite often things are reasonable that cause that. But ultimately, we sometimes would expect, like, if we look at how we would deal with a situation like that, like, let's say we had a issue with a friend, we would probably address it, or, maybe handle it a bit better, or just, like, slowly, subtly peter out rather than just completely ignoring someone. But our brains assume a lot of the time that other people would react the way that we would, or respond the way that we would, and that's where a lot of our disappointments come from. So for me, like, sometimes if I'm in a situation or a conversation, I kind of, if the person doesn't respond in the way that I thought they would, or the way that I would, um, it can be kind of like disappointing or disheartening, because, my expectation was what I would have done. So I hope that makes sense a little bit. Have I missed any other comments? I feel like, I don't know. Oh, yeah, 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 I have actually. So PJ said, "Don't mean to get Buddhist or anything. Please do. Always welcome here. Anything is always welcome here. Um, yeah, don't mean to get Buddhist or anything. When something like this happens, it's a good time to think about impermanence. All that is created is bound to go away one day. It's the law of life and nature." Absolutely, PJ. Like, couldn't have put it better myself. And I struggle with that too. Like, I like consistency, I like stability, security, I like knowing where I stand. And yeah, it is tough, sort of letting go of things a lot of the time. So we have 92 people here. Thank you for joining, guys. I was actually really gutted when I realized that one of my favorite other teachers on here, Rob Gregerson, has his live at the same time, and I just felt so bad because I love Robert, and I love going to his lives, and he's always like an absolute, like, ray of sunshine and such a talented musician. But I was like, oh no, I'm clashing with him, partly because, like, obviously, I wanted to listen to his music as well, and but also because I feel like I don't want people to have to decide or choose between the two of us. But yeah, there's such a lovely community on there, and there's so many great teachers. And for those of you who kind of aren't in the teacher community, everybody is like so friendly and so sweet, and we're all like very supportive of each other. And I'm a fairly new teacher, as a lot of you know. This is only live session number 6, which I'll take a little ad. I'll do a little ad break. For anyone who wants to catch up on the previous sessions, they're all on YouTube, except for the last one. I need to put that on, and you can find that link in my link tree. And also, if you is it anyone's first time here in my live session? I know a lot of you, and I see a lot of you who I know. But if there's anybody that hasn't said hello before, or who's new here, send up some hearts, say hi in the chat. And also, I would very much appreciate it if you could follow me on Insight Timer, and also give me a follow on YouTube, because I will be posting more kind of shorter form and sort of original content on there as well, in, supplement to the Insight Timer lives that I'm doing. Um, yeah, and also, if anybody would like to support me with a donation, I would really appreciate that. As I've mentioned on my previous lives, I've gone through redundancy at work recently, so this is currently my main source of income. I'm working on a few other things sort of on a voluntary basis. But this is kind of, yeah, this is the main thing I'm doing at the moment. Which obviously, I know quite often donations are small, but they do help, and they allow me to upgrade my equipment, or like, do sort of put the resources towards doing these lives. Thank you, Jennifer. That's so sweet of you. Um, and so we've got Brenda from Toronto, Canada. Brenda, it's lovely to have you here. I've been to Canada once when I was much, much younger, but I would love to go back. I was actually hoping to go this year, but it didn't quite happen. Um, so in other news, I have a little update for everybody that's quite an interesting situation that happened. So, how many of you have heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza? He, and, send up some hearts if you have, or, put a message in the chat. So he is a very interesting, sort of, I guess, coach, teacher, like scientist, kind of. He teaches around like the power of the mind and how we can heal ourselves. And I've I was meant to go on. So my mum's gone on his retreat in London, which was like the 5-day one, and this was a couple of years back, and she had a lot of benefit from it. So she really wanted my sister and I to go to one of his retreats. And basically, so we were going to go to Paris this weekend for like a 2.5-day retreat. And before we went, we had to like watch a bunch of videos and read um this book that the PDF version is 530 pages. I don't know how big the real one is, and do a lot of like meditations and stuff. Now, I I tend to sometimes leave some things last minute. So I hadn't actually read the book until I started it on Monday, and I'm now like 150 out of 530 pages in. And last night we got, but I made good progress. I've watched all the videos. But last night we got a message saying that the event has been cancelled. And they basically said that, and there was no information, it just says circumstances beyond our control. And then I joined the Telegram group about it. And, everybody was speaking in French on there, and there was like a French radio article and stuff. And I was just like, can someone please like tell me what's like happened so that you know, because it was really hard to get any information. And ultimately, it seems the French government have basically vetoed the event, which I was really shocked by. So the French medical community um, are basically like a bit like hesitant or doubtful of Dr. Joe Dispenza's claims and teachings. So they basically axed the event. And I thought this was a really interesting choice because so it was only about like 2,500 attendees, which isn't loads when you think about the number of people in Paris. And a lot of them were coming from all over Europe and all over the world, actually, because he doesn't do loads of events all the time. And this is the first one in Europe, I think, like this year or even last year. I don't think there was one. So loads of people, including us, were going to travel and go there. And ultimately, we still have to go to Paris because we can't get a refund on the hotel or the travel. So, yeah, we're my sister and I are just going to Paris this weekend, um, kind of aimlessly because we were meant to be going for this like healing and meditation retreat. I mentioned if anyone missed it with Joe Dispenza. Um, and I was talking to a friend about this last night, and like literally he was saying like, oh, it's so like how like rubbish and how like crap of them that they're canceling it this last minute, like that's so shameful, blah blah. And obviously, I knew at the time, deep down, I knew that it would only be cancelled if there was something, if there was a real, like, valid reason, not just because. So when I found out today that it was this, I was like, well, actually, that does seem like a legitimate thing. It's not like they've just chosen to cancel or he's not feeling well or he's got the sniffles. So yeah, that was um that was an interesting sort of turn of events. Let me see what else I have for you guys today because I saved a few other things that I wanted to share. So, just on the note of the kind of retreat. So one of them, so I sent a message to somebody that I'd been working with yesterday as part of the volunteering thing that I'm doing, and he's a kind of spiritual and life coach and sort of teaches like consciousness and stuff. And he basically, and I messaged him saying, oh, the retreat's been cancelled, because I was telling him like I have to read 500 pages of this book before then. And he said, and I told him that, oh, it's been cancelled, and he was like, oh, so what's the gift in this for you? And I thought that was such an interesting question. And I said, well, to be honest, I probably wouldn't have been completely ready for the event anyway. I would have, probably had to do like a lot more prep and practice some meditations more and actually like finish reading the book, etc. But also it'll be nice to just have some time with my sister and, have a bit of a break, I guess. The So Lawrence just said a weekend in Paris is a dream to some. And yeah, do you know, it absolutely is. But I've been feeling, I don't know if you guys can tell this, and that's why I'm in like cozy clothes, but it's because it's like freezing as well. But I've been a bit run down, and so I really do feel like I could have just used the weekend to kind of relax and recover and not travel. Um, but also, I think I'd expected to go to Paris and be doing this retreat and, working on myself, and to go from that to just kind of being out in the city. And like, one of the things is, I know that if I'm just kind of in Paris, like, obviously I'm going to have to spend money on things, and not that that's a problem, and I'm trying not to have scarcity mindset, but I kind of didn't um plan for that. Or it would have been nice if, things were like refundable. So we've just had some more people join. Hi guys, welcome, welcome. We've covered quite a few sort of topics around like relationships and losing friendships, particularly, and how you um, grieve those. So Tanya, I guess like a question for you that I have, and if anyone else wants to suggest things as well, please feel free. What have you done in the aftermath of that, or what will you do now in the aftermath of that for yourself in order to try and like heal and let go and move forward from this? Or um, I guess like, what's the word I'm looking for? Reconcile this for yourself, or create some sense of closure for you. I'm going to go back to um Eve, because so Eve basically shared that she's ghosted people in the past because she's found it hard to have difficult conversations and be honest about my feelings. I've avoided having these conversations, but would love to start feeling more able to deal with conflict or difficult conversations going forward. So um I guess one of the things that I'd have to ask you, Eve, is, what is your fear when it comes to kind of addressing some of these things, or what do you feel is holding you back? I'm just gonna have a sip of water. And reminder for anyone that's joined that needs a little nudge to like make yourself a cup of tea or have a glass of water, please do stay hydrated. We're getting into cold and flu season, so we need to look after ourselves. Um, yeah. So I guess I don't know if Eve still with us. Um, but I'm gonna kind of talk around that anyway, even if she isn't. So yeah, it can be hard. So having difficult conversations is definitely something that is uncomfortable. And one of the things that I've been talking about throughout this session is things that feel icky. So definitely addressing things when people like misunderstand our intentions. Does anyone else have any examples of what makes you feel icky in relationships or conversations, or where there's conflict? Another one for me is like being ignored feels icky. Or where I feel like, let's say I've like vented or kind of said too much. So, have you guys ever had a situation where something happens and you feel the need to kind of over explain yourself, or you've sent like a barrage of messages or whatever, or, had a like big outburst or reaction, which you didn't mean to do? Well, yeah, expressing boundaries, that's a really, really icky feeling, if you're not used to it. So, you know, especially if you haven't done it before, right? So standing up for yourself, setting boundaries, removing yourself from a situation, because if you haven't done it before, you feel like, oh, what's gonna happen now? Like, is this person gonna, am I gonna, is this person gonna like ignore me or walk away from me, etc. But the reality is that actually, if you express a boundary, and the boundary you're expressing, and I will share a story around this shortly actually, but if you're expressing a boundary and the boundary you've expressed is true to you, then that's the right thing to do. And I'm going to share this story because it's kind of very relevant, and my mum gave me some really great advice around it actually. So I had a situation. I don't know if I've mentioned this on here before. I don't think I have, but I go to a pool and a gym near where I live, and it's mainly me and a bunch of like retired old people that go there at lunchtime. Like, a lot of them are really sweet and people are really lovely, and it's a really nice time. And there's like a lovely sense of community. And there's one of the other members is like this guy who he's a lot older, and he occasionally makes like inappropriate jokes, and sometimes it makes me feel uncomfortable, but quite often I'll laugh it off. But at one point he made a joke that I felt made me feel really uncomfortable and pushed the boundary a little bit too far. And I um I went home, it's like a Friday, and then the next day it still bothered me. It still didn't sit right with me. So I sent him a message very gently and very softly saying like, "Hey, you really enjoy our conversations, but I'd really appreciate it if you could keep the more inappropriate jokes. If you could, not like say them around me, or not direct them at me or whatever. Um, but obviously happy to have like normal conversations with you or whatever." And his response, and I worded it so softly and so gently and so nicely for frankly what he'd said, which was wildly inappropriate and very like lecherous and just not cool at all. And he said, he basically like kicked off, and he was like, really, like, I'm not gonna get pulled, like, what did he say? No, he was like, I can't remember, but it was something along the lines of like, um he just basically wasn't happy at being called out, and he was just like, "Oh, I'm from a different generation. Um, just I am who I am. I'm only like having a laugh." And it was basically just sort of dismissive, responsibility avoiding sort of responses, um, which he essentially felt like he hadn't done anything wrong and that he was in the right. And I was so kind and gracious and gentle in my wording of just, please can you just not make like pervy jokes to or at me. Like, I didn't word it like that. I worded it so softly and so tactfully, but ultimately that's what the issue was. And yeah, so he was a bit kind of awkward or like not very nice on WhatsApp. And then the next time I saw him at the pool, and then he said something like, "Oh, he from now on he'll just say like hi and that's it." And so like next time I saw him at the pool, like, because there's other people there that we both know, and like I don't want it to be uncomfortable or awkward. And so next time I saw him, I said hi, and then he like basically kicked off at me, and he was like, no, no, I said hi, and he said hi, and then I was like, I was like, how are you? And no, I was like, are you alright? And then he was like, I was just like, like the way you say like, how are you? Or like, I was just like, oh, I was like, oh, are you okay? And he was like, not really, no. And then he was like, what you said the other day really upset me. Um, like, I'm not going to get pulled into your wokeness, blah blah. And I was like, I don't think that me not wanting you to make like pervy comments or jokes about me is me being woke. It's just me having a very basic, very reasonable boundary, right? And he was the one that was upset about it then, and I like was really uncomfortable, and I kind of came home and I was quite upset about it, and I spoke to my mom and I said like, it almost makes me feel like, should I have even said anything, because it just feels like awkward and uncomfortable now, like in the past I just laughed it off, but when he said something that like was a little bit over the line and like did make me feel uncomfortable, only then did I address it. And and he claims it's like a generational thing, but there's loads of like other older people that come to the pool that that he's even friends with, like other older men. They don't make comments like that. They don't, they're very like respectful and polite and friendly. So it's not a generational thing, it's a him thing. And yeah, I just honestly felt so gross and icky and upset, because I felt really upset that like, there's no one to like stand up for me, because no one else like knows about the situation. I also felt a bit like I haven't done anything wrong here. Like, how is it that he's done something that's like inappropriate and rude and like not cool, and I've addressed it in a really nice, really gracious way, and yet like he's making me feel like I'm the problem. And that did really bother me and upset me. And when I was talking to my mum about this, and this is why I bring this up, is like, we're getting to the punchline, guys, don't worry. My mum said to me, is that, do you still feel like it did violate a boundary for you, and do you still feel like you know what you said and the boundary expressed is like valid and true for you, and that was the right thing for you to do? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And she was like, well, don't regret it and don't feel bad about it, then you did the right thing. She was like, you did the right thing. You can't control what other people like will say or how they'll respond to you, but you did the thing that was right for you and that you felt was right, and that you needed to you know like, yeah. And it just made me feel really like disappointed overall, because it made me think like this is why women sometimes, and I don't want to generalize, but I think, there is obviously massive stats around the fact that, more women than men have to deal with this kind of thing. And I'm not saying that, but for anyone that has to deal with anything like this, male or female, if this is the kind of response that you get, or it's actually more uncomfortable, or sort of it adds more drama calling it out or addressing it, then like no wonder people don't address things, or call people out on bad behavior, because it's like not easy or convenient to do. And I just felt like, I'm because I'm fairly like comfortable and confident in terms of I will address things if I need to. But even then, it's like there were other comments before this that probably weren't cool, but that I just like shrugged or laughed off. But I know there's lots of people that are a lot less like outspoken than me and probably wouldn't feel comfortable saying anything. And so yeah, just a reminder, like if you see anything, or if you hear anything like this, like please do start help other people, or like stand up for people, or say something or report it. Um and there's like I went to a comedy show the other week, and I think her name might have been like Amy Gledhill. I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but she, at the end of her show, she basically talks about how she was on a train, and she was like hungover and really wanted a Twix bar and a like Diet Coke, and she walked all the way down the length of the train from like Z to like whatever letter further up where the cafe in the train was. And when she was walking to the cafe thing, the cafe cart, I guess it's called, or like the cafe carriage, I don't know. She walked past this group of guys who were obviously like going to a football match or something, and were drinking, and one of them like made a comment about her boobs at one point as she was walking past, and she's like she's a bigger lady, she's quite like top heavy, and they made a comment about that as she walked past. And then when she was walking back through the carriage, and she was saying that when she went to the cafe cart, they didn't have a Twix, so she just had a Diet Coke, but she really needed that, like she felt like she needed the Twix to survive, is what she said. And she basically, when she walked back, one of them like sort of slapped her on the butt. And it was the same guy, I think, that made the comment. And she just like ignored it and carried on walking, and was like, oh, they're drunk, whatever. And then she was really, when she got back to her seat, she was really annoyed. She was like, what? She was like, what? Yeah, she kind of was like, normally she's so outspoken, she's a comedian, she's great at coming up with quick, witty responses. Like, why didn't she say anything or do anything in that situation? And then she like posted an Instagram story about it. And then a lot of her followers were saying to her, like, because she was quite angry about it, and a lot of her followers said stuff like, oh, you absolutely have to report it, because imagine if this is what he's doing on a Sunday morning, imagine what he's doing like later on after the match, like if he thinks it's acceptable behavior now. And like you have to report things when they happen. And so she was like, you're right. And she's like, there were people that were like, other people wouldn't be as like confident as you to even post about it, so you need to like have a voice for people who like might not. And it is quite serious. And so she called the British Transport Police, and she was like really surprised that the guy on the phone was like, because she was saying, because she was almost making excuses for this guy that did this thing. She was like, oh, he was just like being silly and mucking around, like he'd had a couple of drinks. And the officer she was speaking to basically said to her, like, no, you're like minimizing this, like you've just been sexually assaulted basically, and it's not okay. And she's like, what carriage was it, like describe this, blah blah, we'll stop the train, we'll come and arrest him and take him off the train. And they literally did that. And I thought, wow, like it was handled so like efficiently and seriously. And she said that she almost, because of how much she'd she'd like minimized it herself, and partly probably just to it's the thing I was saying about how our brain likes to make sense of things, and therefore her not immediately saying anything or doing anything about it, by minimizing it, it makes that make sense a bit more, or makes that seem like it's like an okay thing to have done. So she so she basically, she didn't really realize like how serious it was, or like that actually it is a big deal, until it was like the police officer actually speaking to her and telling her that it is a serious crime, and then the guy got arrested. Um, so yeah, that's quite an interesting story. And I mean, it's funny how we got here from talking about sort of like relationships and boundaries, I guess. Yeah. So yeah. So it's an interesting one. And then wow, we have 132 meditators here. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being here. Um, and one of the other things that I was gonna share, so around that situation, and I guess I don't know how much, I don't know if everybody that's here heard kind of both parts of that. But yeah, I think um expressing yourself when it's uncomfortable is a difficult one, and I think for me it's you can there's a couple of things you can kind of reflect on. So one of the things is, will you regret it later if you don't? Because I think the other part of it is that sometimes there's situations where you can take a pause and deal with it later, and in those cases obviously you can have the time to reflect and think about what you're going to say or do, or um like you don't have to make any immediate sort of like rash decision. But on the other side of things, you might be in a situation like this comedian I told you about, where you kind of have to say something there and then or do something there and then, because if she hadn't done that immediately, like obviously they might not have been able to catch that guy, or he might have gone on to do that to a lot of other people. Now, and I think it is important for, where people are behaving badly or things that are happening that are not cool at all, like for those things to be addressed and flagged and dealt with before that person thinks that that's an acceptable thing that they can just do all the time. Especially when it pertains to, other people's like health and safety and well-being. Um, so I think that's quite an important one. Um, and then I went off on a tangent in my mind just then, so I'm gonna follow it. On Sunday just gone, as part of this, this show that I'm working on and that I'm kind of gonna, well, that I am volunteering for and that I'm gonna be in. Um, which if anyone wants to know of any like great volunteering opportunities in London, like drop me a line and I can tell you more about it. There's lots of behind the scenes stuff as well if you don't like being in the limelight, but there's like lots of exciting things that you can get involved with, and it's a super exciting, like very um sort of secretly guarded project, but people who are involved, it's totally worth it. So yeah, drop me a message if you want to know more about that. And then just a reminder, like if it's your first time here or if you don't know me, please give me a follow on Insight Timer. I really appreciate it. Give my tracks a listen. And if you're also able to follow me on YouTube, you can find my link for that in the link tree. And I will be posting original content on there soon, probably shorter form stuff. And you can also find the last like 5 live sessions I've done on there as well. And anybody who is open to supporting me today with a donation, I really, really appreciate any support that you guys are able to give me. No amount is too small. As Tesco says, every little helps. And it just kind of helps me to feel supported when I do these sessions, and obviously helps me have the resources to carry on doing them. So I really appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate anything you're able to do to support me, whether that's with a follow, sharing my next live session with friends or family, or a monetary donation. Um, so anyway, I was gonna say that, so this show that I'm working on, I did a first aid training on Sunday, which was like all day. It was first aid and fire safety, and it was really interesting, and it was quite like physically demanding. And I basically hadn't really done CPR properly other than in school. And there was a few things that I learnt that I thought it might be worth kind of sharing with all of you here. Some of you might already know this, but for those who don't, it's definitely worth bearing in mind. So there was a few things that really surprised me. First of all, is that CPR previously, when I learnt it previously, or what I knew about it previously, was that like CPR was supposed to like revive somebody if they had died, or if they weren't breathing anymore and they're unconscious and they didn't have a heartbeat. Whereas now CPR is just seen as a way of basically maintaining blood flow to the brain and keeping the brain oxygenated until you can get a defib machine. Is it defibrillator if you're saying it the full way? But I just say defib because defibrillator, I feel like I can only say it right like 1 in 3 times. Um, but and I asked the first aiders why that is. I said, Brit, thank you. Sorry, Bree, thank you so much for your donation. I really appreciate it. My font's really small on my thing. Um, and yeah, if anyone else is open to supporting, please do. I really appreciate it. So anyway, so I asked the first aiders why basically I have grown up thinking that CPR is meant to revive someone. And they said that that's because that's what they used to think. And obviously, the knowledge and the learning around that has changed. So they basically, now they just use it to sustain like oxygen to the brain and blood flow until they can get a defibrillator, which will basically um, jumpstart the heart. And one of the things that I'd always thought as well, that again was really interesting for me, that I learnt on this is that there's like a if you live in the UK, there's something called Defib Finder, which is where you can basically locate a defibrillator anywhere near you, and it can be it can make a really big difference to like saving someone's life or not. So that was two pieces of information that I didn't know, and apparently in London they're all over the place, which I didn't know at all. And the kind of ideal is that obviously if you find someone that is like not breathing and their heart's stopped, you start a CPR immediately and you try and get a defib machine or try and call the emergency services, as both of those things, as quickly as possible. So if the emergency services arrive, usually they'll have a defibrillator. But if you can find one, even better. And I always thought CPR is this big scary thing of like, oh, what if you do it wrong? What if you crack a rib? Blah blah. But what they taught us, and this might seem obvious to some of you, but like it wasn't to me, is that by the time someone has stopped breathing and their heart stopped, they're legally dead. They're not even alive anymore. So you can't do anything worse than that. But what you can do by doing something or trying CPR is you can give them a chance that they wouldn't otherwise have. So you can only help at that point. You can't like make them more dead than they already are. As I don't know if that sounds very like blunt or direct, but yeah, that's what they taught us, and that actually made me feel really confident, and it made me feel a bit more like, if I'm trained in CPR, which I now am, knowing that I can't do any further damage and I can only help at that point actually removes some of the fear from for me, which I think is quite an important thing to do. And the other thing to note is it's very like physically demanding. So ideally, if you are in a situation where you're trying to give someone CPR, the average response time for an ambulance in London is like 8 minutes, I think. So it would be longer if you're further out, but you might have to literally be doing CPR. And they don't really do the breaths anymore. The breaths aren't really as important. You can do the breaths, but they're not as important as the actually keeping the heart pumping um and doing the actual like CPR part of it. So I thought I'd share that in case it's kind of helpful or useful for anyone. And if you can do a first aid training course, I really recommend it because um, it was very like eye opening for me, and it was very interesting. And doing it as an adult instead of like something that you kind of half pay attention to in school, that's taught by your school nurse who's not doing a very good job of it, was a very different experience. Um, the guinea pigs are popcorning, which I don't know if you guys remember what that is, but basically when they're really happy, like imagine this is a guinea pig, they'll just kind of jump around like this. It's called popcorning because it's like popcorn popping. It's where they kind of just fly around uncontrollably because they're just happy or excited, and they think that's because it's getting closer to their dinner time. And what else was I going to share from that first aid course? Yeah, I think those were like the two main things. Oh yeah, and also that you're supposed to do CPR for as long as you can until like you can get a defibrillator or you can't do it anymore. The so basically the um the you might even have to do it for hours, right? Like depending on where you are and how remote it is or whatever. So you might have to just be doing it for ages, which means you ideally would want to swap with another person because it is really like you meant to do it until you physically can't anymore, or emergency services or a defibrillator arrives. So, and the defibrillator is interesting because I didn't know this, I'd never seen one before, but it actually, once you connect that and do what you need to do for that, it when you turn it on, and again with the defibrillator, if someone has a heartbeat or it's normal, it will not shock them. So it basically, the defibrillator will kind of stop and say like analyzing, and while it's analyzing, you still keep doing CPR, and then it will tell you like it will tell you whether it needs to do a shock or not, depending on what it finds or doesn't find. And then it will say like clear, and then once you're clear, then you press it. And then you keep doing CPR afterwards. But it literally, and it also has like a metronome, so you know like the beats on which you have to do the CPR. So basically, once you have a defibrillator machine, it will basically talk you through what you need to do. The only thing I guess is like having the correct technique for CPR, but even then, again, like I said, it's like once someone needs CPR, they're already legally dead, so you can't do any more damage. And if you have someone who is first aid trained, who can kind of tell you, but you basically need to go about a third of the depth of their chest when you're pressing, and you kind of need to also allow, when you press in, you want to then sort of release your hands enough so that the basically, because what you're doing when you do CPR is, imagine this is the heart, you're allowing the heart to fill with blood, and then you push down again and pump the blood back in. But if you don't lift your hand enough for it to just fill back up, or allow that pause to be long enough, then it doesn't fill back up with blood. And so the whole purpose is that you're basically manually like pumping blood around the body. So I don't know if that is useful, like help for anyone, or if anyone has um had any experience of CPR or anything like that before. Um, we have a final 10 minutes. Is that, well, 12 minutes. Is there anything that anybody specifically wants to ask or cover, or any like questions or advice that anyone wants some support with? Oh, Lauren, okay, you got to go. Thank you so much for being here. You're always such a delight, as I'm sure everyone feels. Thank you. I hope I feel better soon too. And I'm sure I'll have a nice weekend. Thank you, Lauren. You too. Have a great week, and I'm sure we'll speak soon. Um, yeah, and then the other thing I was going to share. So for those of you who've just joined, I was meant to be going to Dr. Joe Dispenza's retreat in Paris this weekend, which has now been cancelled because the French government, um, or like the French like medical whatever, have some questions or concerns around his teachings. So they've basically vetoed the event, and I had to read his book before going, and I'm 150 pages into like a 530-page book. And one of the things in there that I found really interesting that I wanted to share with you guys is that one of the big like takeaways for me is that he was talking about change, and when we try and do something or change something, one of the main things that holds us back is not like willpower or discipline, but it's our kind of emotions, our feelings, our kind of brain chemistry, and also habits in terms of, so what he says is that if we continue to do all the same things we've been doing, and we keep thinking the way we've been thinking and feeling the way we've been feeling, then basically we end up still being in the same mindset, headspace, the same, and we have the same, like we perpetuate the same behaviors, etc. And it's really hard to get out of them. Bye, Jennifer. Nice to see you. And thank you again for being here and for your support. Um, so yeah, so what I was saying about what he says. So, and he says that in order to kind of have actual change or progress or growth or whatever it is, you need to have your kind of emotional feeling state, your inner feeling emotional state needs to match with your body's actions, right? So if you're just doing one of those two things, then you basically won't be able to do it. So if you're feeling and thinking like positively, but then you're still doing the same things that you were always doing, that will prevent you from moving forward and having consistent progress. Equally, if you're trying to do the new things, like the new behaviors, like go to the gym or whatever it is that you're trying to do, but then your emotional and feeling state is still that of like, lack, or that you're not worthy of being like healthy, or you're still kind of in the same like mindset that you were previously, then you won't change, like you'll struggle with change as well. And so he basically talks about like there's a little circle diagram that he has with like an arrow going this way and an arrow going that way, and there's like thoughts at the top, feelings at the bottom, and it's like thoughts create feelings and feelings create thoughts, and these keep perpetuating. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then I guess the last thing that I'll kind of end on is 2222 for anybody that's in the UK or anyone that likes angel numbers. It's 2222 here anyway. Um, so I was just gonna say that, yeah, in terms of the situation that I'm dealing with today, that I'm struggling with, so I had a situation where something happened that I wasn't totally comfortable with, and I I basically like I said something and I kind of felt like it was, I know I said something and it was missed or ignored, but the person responded to something else. So they just like messaged me as if it was a fresh conversation. And I kind of flagged the thing and I said, "Hey, not sure if you saw this part," because it was something that I kind of expected or wanted a response to. And then I said, like, I really appreciate like getting a response, or when I say something, like it being acknowledged. And then the person messaged me back and again didn't respond to any of those things. Like, this is obviously, I've nudged and then again it's been ignored. And I felt really like, because for me I have anxious attachment as well, so for me I felt like what I have to say doesn't matter. I felt kind of ignored. And I was kind of disappointed because I had this expectation from like when I'd sent the original message the night before, that I would, that my message would be like appreciated, or at the very least acknowledged, right? And so I basically addressed it afterwards, like just saying that, like, obviously I understand that, if you missed something the first time, fine, but the second time it just feels like it's intentional. And obviously, looking at it objectively, like, I know that, the other person has stuff going on, they might have genuinely missed it or not had capacity, and they were just communicating what they felt was like a short important message to me and ignoring what I'd said. um, but yeah, since then I kind of, and I feel like I was fair in addressing it and I said it in a nice way. But I do understand also how it could have come across as like a lot, because like, I said this earlier, like I tend to like explain myself a lot when I feel uncomfortable, or when I'm setting a boundary or addressing something, I feel like I have to like justify or explain why I feel that way or whatever quite a lot. So I sent like quite a few messages sort of saying that, why I'd expected a response and that I was a bit disappointed, etc. And yeah, didn't I basically like didn't get a response after that at all. And I like, I don't feel super great about it. I'll be honest, it's been on my mind a little bit today. And partly in the past, I might have sort of let it affect my day and not gotten on with other things, or just continued to feel like, icky and horrible about it, and or maybe even follow up again. Because I think, for anyone who has anxious attachment, feeling ignored is like the worst thing in the world. um but I managed to just like hit pause and leave it and go for a walk with my friend, and then like, get on with a few other things that I needed to do around the house. But it's still that thing, like I completely know that feeling of where things don't go the way that we want them to. And I thought it was interesting this situation happened when I was talking about this today. And so for me, and I've talked about this situation with a few friends already today, and it's like the the situation itself didn't take that much energy, but the amount of energy that I then give it is up to me, which I would say I've done better than I've done in the past, but still not ideal. um so yeah, just that's just a bit of reflection. I'm like, we're all human, especially like, everyone on Insight Timer, I think, has a level of like self-awareness. We know when we can do better, or where we've made progress. And I think it's important to notice that too. Like, I do feel like I could have given it less energy than I did, and hopefully, one day soon that will be true. But at the same time, if this had happened like a year or a couple of years ago, it would have definitely affected me more. And you know, it would have even affected my energy before like doing a live or something like this. Whereas I've managed to a little bit like just park it and be like, well, I've done, and it's a bit like what we were saying earlier. It's kind of that feeling of, well, I've done everything that I can do in this situation. It's now like I need to now just let go of it. And it's not even about like, oh, the ball's in the other person's court, because I think that's the difference in, when we would be talking about things a couple of years ago, we would have been like, oh, well, I've done my part. Now it's down to the other person. And I think I don't look at it so simplistically now. Now, the way I look at it is I've done what's true to me. I've done what I needed to do or said what I needed to say. And now I just need to leave it. It's not even about the other person necessarily. It's about like, okay, well, what do I now do for the rest of my day? Or how do I make sure that I have like a productive evening and feel okay and sleep well at night today instead of like worrying about this? So yeah, I think that's what I'll leave you on. I think, I'll be honest, when I get off this Insight Time Alive, I probably am going to check my phone and be like, oh, did I get a response to this thing? And has it been resolved? Or am I probably going to go to bed with it unresolved? But, either way, like I can't control it. So we just have to kind of let go of things sometimes and know that we're doing the best that we can. And yeah, we can't control other people or how people are going to respond to us. And we won't always get the outcome we want. And we just have to kind of sit in that discomfort. So that's what I'm sort of like leaving this session on. And has anybody got anything nice planned for the weekend and the week ahead, or anything they're looking forward to that they'd like to share? Is anyone joining any other live sessions after this one ends in 2 minutes? Because we can all kind of jump ship and go over there together for the after party. Let me know. And as I said, if anyone who isn't following me on here, I would absolutely love your support through kind of follows on here and follows on my YouTube channel. And I will be adding kind of shorter form original content on there. And yeah, anybody who's in a position to support me with a donation, however small, it helps me know that I'm on the right track and that you guys value what I have to say and contribute. But also, I appreciate you guys giving your time and energy being here. And if you want to support me in other ways as well, just have a look on my link tree. So DM said, I have that same type of issue working with other business people. It taps into worthiness that I need to have of myself. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I've definitely recognized recently that I need to do a lot of work on like self-esteem, self-worth, and then also self-regulation. And I was talking to like my mum and other friends about this, is that it's kind of tough thinking about the fact that the amount of work that we have to do, and it's always a constant like work in progress type thing, but the amount of work we have to do but we're fighting against like a whole lifetime of everything else that has happened up until this point. So it's quite a big it's quite a lot to sometimes work through and overcome, and it's going to take time, and that is okay. But yeah, we're all here to kind of support each other and learn together. And if there's ever anything that I can do personally to support you or to help you kind of grow, or any topics that we can address in our sessions, or anything that you guys need advice or support on, please do share them here. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you next week. I think my next live is going to be next Thursday evening, at the same or a similar time. So I will see you guys then. And thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you for your follows, your donations, and also, yeah, any kind of support you're able to give me by sharing my sessions or contributing. Well, and we've got a final note to end on. So DM says, I use essential oils and grounding to help me with the emotional self-regulation. Otherwise, others will try to get more out of you, and it's up to you to know when it's enough. Yeah. And I actually did that today. The park was muddy, but I still went and did some earthing or grounding, as it's called. I had to wash my feet 3 times though to get rid of all the mud. But it definitely made me feel a lot calmer. And obviously doing these sessions is really helpful. I think, after the situation I had today and like how I felt, I definitely was like looking forward to doing this and just being here with you guys for an hour and a half, and using a different part of my brain and my mind and my energy. But it's nice that I can also like share and be open and tell you what's going on also. So yeah, have a lovely, lovely rest of your week. I can't believe it's Friday tomorrow. That just occurred to me. But I also can't believe it's already October. I was saying to someone the other day, it literally feels like someone just took me out of like an earlier part of the year and just put me in October. I don't know if anyone else feels like that. Um, but yeah, if you guys want to know where my next sessions are, give me a follow on Insight Timer, and you can also find me on YouTube, and you can find the past sessions on YouTube. And any support that you have through sharing or following is very much appreciated, or donations, of course. And good night. And until next time, bye, guys.